The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. Picture yourself at 19 years old. You're teetering on the edge of adulthood, drowning in insecurity and burning questions about who you're supposed to become. Then suddenly, you're catapulted into the center of a galaxy. Not a real one, but one that feels just as enormous and terrifying. You're on a film set in a foreign country, surrounded by people decades older, playing a character who's brave, fierce, and commanding. Everything you're desperately hoping you might be, but aren't sure you actually are. And then, you stumble into a secret involving one of the most magnetic, intimidating, and very married men on that set. A man 14 years older than you. There are no deep heart-to-hearts, no grand romantic declarations. Just a quiet, all-consuming intensity that unfolds on weekends in borrowed apartments, then evaporates completely by Monday morning, leaving you wondering if any of it was even real. You can't breathe a word to anyone, so you channel all that confusion, that ache, that desperate longing into a diary. 40 years later, those diaries resurface. What you're about to discover isn't just behind-the-scenes Star Wars trivia, it's a peek behind the mask of an icon. Carrie Fisher's The Princess Diarist stands as one of the most fearless and raw memoirs ever written about fame. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies, not because it served up juicy celebrity gossip, but because it revealed something universal. Even the people we see as heroes are wrestling with the exact same feelings of doubt, desire, and the deep need to be truly seen. By the time we're done, you'll understand the crushing weight that comes with wearing a crown, even a make-believe one. You'll hear about the secret love affair that shaped a princess, and you'll uncover the profound lesson Carrie Fisher learned about identity, how the roles we play can sometimes rescue us, and sometimes threaten to swallow us whole. This is the story of the girl behind those galactic buns. To understand the woman who became Princess Leia, you first need to understand the world she was born into. Carrie Fisher didn't wander into show business by accident. She was born smack in the middle of its brightest, most blinding spotlight. Her parents were Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, known throughout the 1950s as America's sweethearts. They were the golden couple, a dashing crooner and a sparkling actress. Their life looked like a fairy tale ripped straight from magazine covers. But young Carrie learned a lesson that would echo through her entire life. Fairy tales are fragile things. When she was barely out of diapers, that perfect picture exploded in the most public way imaginable. Her father left her mother for Elizabeth Taylor, a close family friend. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a national scandal, a media-feeding frenzy. Suddenly, her family's private agony became public entertainment. She watched her mother, a woman of tremendous strength, navigate this humiliation with grace that barely concealed the deep wounds beneath. She saw her father transform into what she called America's cad, a man more drawn to fame, affairs, and substances than to fatherhood. This experience planted a seed of deep cynicism in young Carrie. She saw show business not as glamorous, but as a fickle, cruel machine that built you up only to delight in your collapse. It was an industry that, as she put it, doled out a sense of uneasiness and humiliation like tepid snacks at movie screenings. She watched her mother's star slowly dim, transitioning from big-budget Hollywood films to nightclub acts in Las Vegas. She heard her own grandmother sigh that being Debbie Reynolds used to mean something in this town. So Carrie made herself a promise. She would never, ever go into show business. But life, as it tends to do, had different ideas. At 17, despite her resistance, she found herself on the set of Shampoo, starring the legendary Warren Beatty. She hadn't chased it, but the pull of that world proved undeniable. In one of the book's most revealing moments, she describes Warren, the star and producer, asking whether she should wear a bra under her tennis outfit for a scene. He had her remove it so he could compare. She stood there, a teenager, while a powerful man casually studied her chest and declared, Let's go without. This was her welcome to the industry, a world where her body was a prop, and her comfort took a back seat to the vision of the men calling the shots. She performed well in the film but still wasn't sold on this life. She craved something real, an escape from the shadow of her parents' fame. So she did what any smart, rebellious teenager would do. She fled to England to study at the Central School of Speech and Drama in London. For the first time she was on her own, living in a tiny apartment, free from the judgment and expectations of her family. She was finally just Carrie. Then a galaxy far, far away came calling. It was Christmas break, and she was back in Los Angeles. She heard about an audition for 2 directors at the same time. One was Brian De Palma, casting a horror film called Carrie. The other was a quiet, bearded guy named George Lucas, casting some weird science fiction thing. She thought it would be a funny little victory to land the part in Carrie. Carrie playing Carrie in Carrie. She walked into the audition room and found both directors behind their desks. George Lucas was, in her words, all but mute. He nodded, and that was about it. Brian De Palma handled all the talking. She fumbled through her answers, feeling awkward and unimpressive. But something must have resonated with the quiet man in the corner, because she was asked to stay and read for the part of a princess. The scene wasn't about being delicate or waiting for rescue. It was charged with authority, confidence, and this strange formal language. It was about leadership. She read it, then went home, certain she'd blown it, convinced she'd soon be heading back to her quiet life in London. A few days later, the full script arrived. It was called Star Wars, a space fantasy. She called her friend Miguel Ferrer, another child of Hollywood royalty, and they sat on her bed reading it aloud. That's when the magic struck. The characters, she said, jumped off the pages. The universe opened up around them. She was captivated by Princess Leia, a young woman kidnapped by the villainous Darth Vader, tortured and, in the original script, discovered upside down and unconscious with yellow eyes. It was bizarre and powerful, and she was hooked. Whoever landed this part, she thought, would get to do something incredible. The final audition paired her with an actor she'd never encountered before, a carpenter who'd done a small part in one of George Lucas's earlier films. He was handsome, but in a rugged, almost grumpy way. He seemed completely unimpressed with everything, including her. His name was Harrison Ford. She was so nervous she barely remembered the reading. The following week, her agent called. "They called," he said. And after a long, stomach-churning pause, "They want you." Carrie ran out of her house into the street. It was raining in Los Angeles, a rare event that felt like fate. She was Princess Leia. She didn't realize then that in that moment, Carrie Fisher, the girl who wanted to escape show business, had been cast in a role she would never, ever escape. "I had never been Princess Leia before," she wrote, "and now I would be her forever." Filming Star Wars took place in England, which meant she could leave drama school without abandoning the country where she'd found her independence. She moved into a friend's cramped flat and prepared for what she assumed would be a 3-month gig on a quirky, low-budget sci-fi movie. First order of business, her appearance. The studio told her she needed to lose 10 pounds. She weighed only 110 to begin with, but this was her first taste of the relentless scrutiny that would shadow her career. Then came the hair. That hairstyle, she writes, would impact how everyone would envision me for the rest of my life. Pat McDermott, the hairdresser, showed her sketches of wild, otherworldly designs. After countless failed experiments that made Carrie's round face look even rounder, they landed on the one, those iconic cinnamon bun side buns. 2 long hairpieces were practically bolted to her head and twisted into those famous shapes. The process took 2 hours, every single morning. She'd arrive at the studio before sunrise, doze off in the makeup chair, and wake up transformed into Princess Leia. On set, she felt like a fraud. She was 19, insecure, surrounded by a mostly British entirely male crew. She tried to stay invisible, hoping nobody would notice she hadn't quite shed those 10 pounds. She was handed dialogue that felt absurd to say seriously. Lines like, "I thought I recognized your foul stench when I arrived on board." Who actually talks like that? George Lucas, a man of remarkably few words, gave her just one real piece of direction. After she delivered a line sarcastically, he pulled her aside and explained, very seriously, that for Leia, this wasn't funny. Her entire planet was about to be obliterated. Everything she'd ever known was about to vanish forever. She was devastated. It was a crucial insight. Leia wasn't just a sarcastic princess. She was a leader carrying the weight of countless lives on her shoulders, using humor as armor against unbearable pain. And it was in this strange, isolated world, so far from home, that the heart of this book's story unfolds. Carrie Fisher kept a secret for 40 years, a secret she finally shares in the Princess Diarist. She called it kerosene. She entered the filming of Star Wars hoping, in that uniquely 19-year-old way, to have a sophisticated affair. She wanted to seem worldly, experienced, like someone who'd been around. The truth was painfully different. She'd had one boyfriend. She was, in her own words, awful with men. A belief she'd carried since watching her parents' marriage implode. The one man she was certain she wouldn't have an affair with was Harrison Ford. He was, first of all, way too old for her, 33 to her 19. He was married with 2 children. And he was intimidating. His face, she wrote, in repose, looked to me like it was closer to a scowl than to any other expression. He was quiet, reserved, radiating an energy that made her feel clumsy and tongue-tied. He was a man. She was still figuring out how to be an adult. They were, she thought, from completely different worlds. Then came George Lucas's 32nd birthday party. It was held in a dingy room next to the studio cafeteria. The crew, mostly rowdy British guys, were there to blow off steam. Carrie, basically the only woman at the party, became their target. They were determined to get her drunk. She tried resisting, but the people-pleaser in her eventually caved. The alcohol hit hard and fast. She became loud, giggly, the center of attention. At some point, a group of crew members started a joke abduction, trying to carry her out. It was playful, but with an edge of something less innocent. That's when a voice cut through the noise. An American voice. "Where are you taking her?" It was Harrison. He stepped in, not playfully, but with quiet authority. A pretend tug-of-war over Carrie turned real. The crew pulled, Harrison pushed back, and in that chaotic, wine-soaked moment, she knew who she wanted to win. Harrison threw her into the back seat of his studio car and told the driver, "Go!" In that car, on the ride from the studio back to London, something shifted. There was, she writes, unexpected exploratory kissing. It was a preview, a hint of what was coming. Later that night, after a group dinner with Mark Hamill and others, Harrison offered to drop her at her flat. He took her arm and walked her to a taxi. Once inside, he pulled her close, and they rehearsed, as she cheekily puts it, the kissing they'd be doing on screen a year and a half later in The Empire Strikes Back. He didn't just drop her off. That night launched a 3-month affair. It wasn't a romance in any traditional sense. It was a secret kept on weekends. During the week on set, they acted like nothing had happened. They'd be Han and Leia, bickering and bantering. Then, on Friday night, they'd become Harrison and Carrie, 2 people sharing a space filled mostly with silence. Her diary entries from that period, which form the emotional core of the book, are raw and heartbreakingly beautiful. They're the words of a young woman consumed by obsessive infatuation with a man she can't read and can't talk to. "I have filled him in to be unobtainable, disinterested, attractive, and bored with my company," she wrote. "My ideal mate, someone to endure, never to enjoy." She was paralyzed by insecurity. She was terrified of saying the wrong thing, of revealing just how inexperienced and vulnerable she really was. She desperately wanted him to like her, to see her, but felt the only way to keep him was to pretend she didn't need him at all. "I can charm the birds out of everybody else's trees but his," she lamented in her journal. Their time together happened at her apartment, usually under the foggy influence of what she calls the brutal strength of Harrison's preferred strain of pot. The marijuana, she admits, erased many specific memories, leaving behind only a feeling of discomfort, paranoia, lying awake beside him, trying to think of something to say other than the one thing she desperately wanted to ask. Do you love me? One night at a pub, she took a risk. She did an impression of him, his swagger, his bored, disenchanted expression, and to her complete shock, he laughed. Not just a smile, but a hard, silent laugh of genuine amusement. For her, it was a breakthrough. This was the first time I felt as though Harrison liked me, she writes. Not because he wanted to sleep with me. He liked me. I'd made him laugh. But the moment was fleeting. She later let slip that she'd only had one real boyfriend. Harrison's expression changed. He seemed disappointed, almost burdened. Decades later, she understood why. Her inexperience meant he was, quote, burdened with something very like responsibility, a gift he hadn't wanted or expected. The affair ended as quietly as it began. Harrison finished filming 2 weeks before she did. They flew back to Los Angeles together, sitting side by side in coach for 14 hours. On that flight, he was kind. He said something she'd remember forever, the only time he ever acknowledged what had passed between them. You have the eyes of a doe, he told her, and the balls of a samurai. For her, it was enough. It was the closing of a door on a cinematic episode, both on-screen and off. When Star Wars hit theaters in 1977, it wasn't just successful, it was a cultural earthquake that changed everything. Suddenly, Carrie, Harrison, and Mark were among the most famous people on the planet. None of them, she says, had any idea how to handle fame. The movie misbehaved. It, quote, leaked out of the theater, poured off the screen, affected a lot of people so deeply that they required endless talismans and artifacts to stay connected to it. And Carrie Fisher became inseparable from Princess Leia. It wasn't Carrie who was famous, it was the princess. Carrie just happened to look like her. This created a lifelong, complicated relationship with her own identity. For the rest of her life, she'd be asked about Leia, expected to defend Leia, and resent being confused with Leia. Who was she, if not this intergalactic heroine? She talks with her trademark wit and brutal honesty about the business of fame, what she calls the celebrity lap dance. Signing autographs for money at conventions, she explains, is a higher form of prostitution. It's trading intimacy for cash. She describes the fans with deep affection and understanding. They're not just collectors. They're people for whom Star Wars was transformative. They share their stories with her, arrive in costumes, name their children Leia. One of the most touching moments involves a little girl dressed as Leia being brought to meet her. The girl sees this older woman and starts crying. No, she wails. I want the other Leia, not the old one. It's both funny and heartbreaking, a reminder of fame's impossible contract. You're frozen in time for your fans, while your real self keeps aging. She reflects on the character that defined her. Leia mattered to her. She was her caretaker, her representative on Earth. She spent her life wishing she'd finally just go away and leave me to be myself alone, but then wondering who I'd be without her. What would she have been if not Princess Leia? I'd be me, she writes. You know, Carrie, just me. But the book leaves you feeling there was no just Carrie. The witty, insecure girl who wrote those diaries, the courageous actress who stood up to Hollywood, and the iconic princess who inspired millions were all, ultimately, different facets of one brilliant person. When you finish The Princess Diarist, you're left with something both deeply sad and incredibly uplifting. This isn't a book about spaceships and lightsabers. It's a book about the messy, beautiful, often painful experience of being human. The most powerful lesson here is about searching for identity. At 17, you're trying on different versions of yourself, figuring out who you are and who you want to become. Carrie Fisher's journey was that universal experience, just magnified 1,000 times. She was trying to find Carrie, while the entire world kept screaming, Leia! Her story powerfully reminds us that the roles we play, Whether it's the honor student, the rebellious kid, the star athlete, or even a galactic princess, can become a prison if we're not careful. They can overshadow the complex, vulnerable person underneath. But what Carrie ultimately shows us is that we can also make peace with those roles. We can integrate them, draw strength from them, even learn to love them, without letting them completely define us. The second thing that lingers is her radical vulnerability. In an age of carefully curated social media perfection, Carrie Fisher's willingness to expose her insecurities feels like fresh air. Her diaries aren't polished or pretty. They're the raw, unfiltered thoughts of a young woman in the grip of unrequited obsession. She felt foolish, worthless, desperate. And by sharing that, she gives us all permission to be imperfect. She shows us that our deepest insecurities don't make us weak. They make us human. Her courage wasn't just facing down Darth Vader. It was facing down her own inner demons and sharing that struggle with the world. So what can we take from this? First, embrace the power of writing your own story. Carrie's diaries were her lifeline. They were the one place she could be completely honest, the one place she could make sense of the chaos inside. You don't need to be a famous writer. Just grab a notebook. Write down your fears, your hopes, your confusing feelings. Putting words to your experience is one of the most powerful ways to understand it and to understand yourself. Second, look at the people you admire with fresh empathy. Whether it's a celebrity, a teacher, or a leader in your community, remember that behind the public face is a private person wrestling with their own doubts and fears. Fame, success, and authority are masks, and Carrie's story reminds us to always look for the human being behind them. This book is a gift. It's funny, it's wise, and it's heartbreakingly honest. Carrie Fisher may be known for playing a princess, but her true legacy is reigning as the queen of truth-telling, no matter how messy it got. That was a summary of The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. We've certainly traveled through the main galaxy of her story today, but I need to be honest with you. A summary is like viewing a star through a telescope. You can see its light, but you can't feel its warmth. The real magic of this book lives in Carrie's unique voice, her wit, her vulnerability, and her incredible way with words. This summary is designed to help you decide if her story is one you want to experience firsthand. If anything we've explored today has sparked your curiosity or touched your heart, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning about a life. It's an experience that might just change how you see fame, love, and your own search for who you are. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another transformative book from some of the world's most fascinating minds. Let's keep growing together.